Come on in, y'all. Welcome to episode 16 of the Half Price Concessions podcast. Before we get started, we'd like to say a big thank you. Whether this is your first time listening to the podcast or you've been with us since the beginning, we sincerely appreciate you listening. Do us a favor and hit the subscribe button on whichever app you're listening to for this podcast. Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Himalaya, Overcast, Castbox, Pocket Cast, or Castro, subscribe, rate, and give us a review, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It helps us out a ton. Today's episode with Buddy Payne is on a topic that we've discussed many a time as race fans on the ride to races, on the way home from races, or even at the races during intermission or quiet times. Man, I wish I had been there. That quote, I wish I had been there. As a race fan, you can't be at every single race for every special moment. It's literally impossible to do. We got to work for a living. A lot of times it's a race you watch on TV or listen to on radio, or you go back and watch on YouTube or elsewhere. It's those special moments and historic moments in racing that can't be repeated, but can in most cases at least gone back and replayed. To be there in person and in that moment would have been the coolest thing ever. And that's what we discussed today. What races would we hop in our time machine for and go back and watch in person, in the stands? What moments would we love to enjoy as a race fan in the stands? So sit back and relax as we jump into the time machine for episode 16 of the Half Price Concessions podcast. The races we wish we could have seen in person is coming up in just a moment. Hey guys, have you heard about Anchor? Well, you should. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. First and foremost, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your cell phone or your computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you. It takes all the work out of it. Your podcast can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Just download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. For today's list, we're going with something that's not quite debatable. We're going to get into our feelings today. We're talking about races that we wish we had been there in person for, because you can attest to it. A lot of times today with modern technology, we watch a lot of races on Dirt Vision, on Dirt, or you can watch so much on TV now. There's so much streaming out there that you don't have to be there as much in person as you used to be. But you can attest to this. To be there in person is a whole different experience than watching it on any kind of streaming service.
Absolutely, and that's true for a lot of sports, and I really think more so with motorsports than probably any of your ball and stick sports. Maybe hockey's probably the first one that comes to mind as far as just better being there in person, but I mean, watching at home does have its benefits. You know, the concessions are free, and you can get up and go to the bathroom whenever you want to, kind of thing. But just that atmosphere and the experience, and then always, you know, when you're just talking with a fellow friend, be like, "Yeah, I was there," or you know, you can always look back. Yeah, I got to see, you know, X driver, you know, race or do this or that or whatever. But yeah, these lists are fun, and you know, we leave it open so we can get some of that fun debate back, and because everybody's, you know, going to have their own opinions and stuff, and that's what makes it fun about it. And we're not saying, you know, these are the greatest. It's just to us. So,
yeah. You know, one of the things I thought about when making my list was a lot of these events, probably all these events, if I had been there in the moment, in the time, you don't get the historical perspective on it until years go by. So that's one thing I kept coming up with on my list was like, you know, if I'd have been there at the moment, it would have been cool in the moment, but it would have been cooler looking back, because as time goes on and things change and people pass on, you know, and things just happen, these events gain significance. Like I thought about getting to go to the last Cup race at North Wilkesboro. At the time I went, I did not, obviously, I didn't have that ability to wrap my brain around and realize what I was watching, as significant as it was. To me, it was just going to a race at a racetrack up off of 421. So I know that's something that echoed a lot in my list. Was I appreciated them at the time, the ones I did watch at the time, but I know that if I had been there at the time, I wouldn't have had this same appreciation. It has only grown.
Well, you hear that a lot in sports, when a team wins a championship, and they always interview them and they ask, has it sunk in yet that you're, a champion of whatever sport it is? And it never does, because you're in that moment and you don't realize, but you don't really feel that effect of what was just accomplished. And I think that's the same way for some of these like really great races. You're there, and I've been to so many now. I always know, personal opinion or biases aside, I always know that was a really good race with whoever I'm with when we're walking back to the truck or driving back home, how long we're talking about it in a positive manner. Sometimes it's like, man, that was a stinker of a show.
Man, that hot dog busted my gut from the concession stand.
I was like, man, I wish they had one more support division. But no, it's always, how long's, when you're walking out, or even with the crowd, when you hear people still talking about it on your way back to the truck or driving home, you're like, man, that was going to be one that I'm really glad I was at. And like I said, you go to so many, it's I don't want to say that you get so used to it or whatever, or your expectations raised higher and higher and higher. But like you just have to appreciate it in the moment, kind of thing.
So we both made a list. This is not like the previous list where we ranked people. This is really just more open, because I don't think we already agreed we hated the GOAT discussion as far as drivers. I think for race discussion, as broad as we're going, we don't like comparing eras. That's one thing you and I both agree on, and we've both got multiple disciplines on our list. So this is no rank by any means. This is, I think, just emotional attachment to us.
Yeah, this is too open, because what your consideration of a good race is going to be different from me, or what you appreciate about a race is going to be different from me. Some people like a bunch of wrecks. They want to see just carnage, and then there's some people that appreciate pit strategy, and this guy wasn't in the top 20 all day, and they were able to work. So it's way too open, and it's way too opinionated to have a concrete, this is the greatest race of all time.
So I think what we'll do, kind of the best way to do this, we'll, kind of give the name of the event or the year or whatever it was, what kind of racing it was, and then we'll kind of go through what makes it significant to us. And, we're both race fans, so I'm sure we're both going to find something to appreciate in it. So I'll kick us off. I'm actually not going to go too far back with my first one. I'm only going back to 1997. The Galaxy Foods 300 at Hickory Motor Speedway.
Hickory.
Back when the Busch Series still ran at tracks that they're supposed to run at. Not Cup Light, but that's a different show. What's significant about this one to me that makes me wish I was there was it was a win for 55-year-old Dick Trickle, old Tricky
Nice.
Dick. And it was actually his first win in the NASCAR Busch Series. Dick Trickle didn't get to win a Cup Series race. He actually was the oldest driver to win a Busch race at 55 years old. And what makes this significant to me is a couple of things. Number one, it goes back to a time where I appreciated the Busch Series more. Not that I don't appreciate Xfinity, but I think it was so much better suited and connected to short track grassroots fans racing on those tracks like Hickory and Myrtle Beach and South Boston, and they kind of they grew too much. My grandpa said they got too big for their britches.
Yeah.
I appreciate that era more, but then more for the historical significance, I wish I'd have been there to see Dick Trickle get that win, because when you talk about asphalt short track racing, Dick Trickle is, incredible. The stats, it's a little hard to get the proper research on his numbers, but most historians have him pegged at about 1,200 short track wins. Wow. This was a guy who won. He would race Wednesday night, Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. He would travel all the way down to Georgia and Florida and run in, probably what asphalt people would consider a super late model, not like a late model stock like runs in this region. And he was just this journeyman who he got to Cup because Bobby Allison got hurt at Pocono, and kind of after that time, He was never in really good equipment in the Cup Series. Plus, he's really past his prime. He was in his 50s, and all his wins had kind of already come. But then I also looked at some of the other names that were in that race. You had Jason Keller, Elliott and Hermie Sadler. Buckshot Jones was in that race. Dennis Setzer, another short track guy that came up. And probably my favorite nickname in asphalt racing, Mike McLaughlin. Do you remember his nickname?
Magic Shoes.
Magic Shoes, Mike McLaughlin. So to me, it would have been cool just to be able to look back and say, I saw Dick Trickle win a Busch race just because of what he contributed to short track racing through his success. I mean, Kenny Wallace and Rusty Wallace and Mark Martin, all these guys that come from the Midwest, they all talk about Dick Trickle for a reason. He was just an incredible driver. I mean, you don't win 1,200 races by someone else holding the steering wheel and having dumb luck.
That's right. And like you said, the Busch Series back then, when they would run, those local tracks, it was so much fun. You attested to the grassroots feel and all that kind of stuff. But as a fan of someone, that goes to those tracks, every Saturday to support the local show, because they ran, South Boston, Myrtle Beach, Hickory, as you said. So as a fan going to those local shows, you get to go and you get to see like premier guys, names that you hear about on Saturdays and Sundays come to your hometown and race, and you kind of see how they do on a track that that you're seeing your guys run on, and it's just that connection with that level fan, your true diehard backbone on the sport fan. That is a big reason why it grew so much during that time frame, and then, as you said, they've kind of separated more and more and more throughout the years. And the Xfinity Series, you can't really. You ask any average race fan, they probably couldn't tell you 5 drivers that run in it.
Yeah, they've lost that connection.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's my first one.
Okay.
What's your first one?
First one, I'm going to go straight line on my first one. NHRA, I'm going to the finals in 2006 at Pomona, and simply, as drag race fans know it, as The Run by Tony Schumacher. Tony Schumacher throughout that year started off pretty strong. About midway through the year, just had some bad luck going mechanically. They just couldn't keep an engine together, and at one point in the season had fallen all the way to 8th in points. Crew chief change. They made some changes with setups and whatnot, and they started just on a tear the second half of that year. So anyway, coming down to that final event, he is down 45 points. And the way the points work in NHRA is you get 20 points per round. Doug Coletta was leading the points at the time, so he would have had to have gone 3 rounds further than Doug Coletta. So the qualifying night, Doug Coletta gets P1 and Schumacher goes P2. So now he knows he can't, they're on opposite sides of the bracket, so he's going to have some help for somebody to knock him out. Going into the semifinals, you got Coletta is running against Melanie Troxel. Troxel makes it there, but obviously Coletta is going to be the definite favorite in that run. On a hole shot, Troxel beats her. So now Schumacher has to win his semifinal, win the final, and also in drag racing, if you set a new record, you get 20 extra bonus points for that as well. So he had to win semifinals, win the final, and set a new speed record. And what does he do? He wins in the semifinals, comes down in the final. He wins it, sets a new ET record at a 4.428, which obviously was a record at the time. They were still running quarter mile at the time then. And he wins the championship by 15 points. Wow. So just unbelievable comeback. That would have been awesome. I guess we should have kind of started this thing like, what is your definition of a good race or a great race? Because for me, I love seeing, obviously the action. I like seeing passing, whatever the motorsport is. But I like the historical side of things. I wanted to be there when history was made, and definitely history was made by then. Just all odds stacked against him, and he comes through there at the final round. Just so improbable for him to win the championship after coming in so far down.
Well, you know what? I think just looking at what I've got coming up, I think different events on my list have different historical significance or reasons they're on this list. So maybe my first one from the Busch race was the historical significance, where my next race is going to be for the action. Okay. So maybe we can do that going forward.
Okay.
But so my next one, I started off in 97. I come forward again. I'm going 2006. And I'm going the Indianapolis 500, the greatest spectacle in racing. I don't care what your local track calls their big event. There is only one greatest spectacle in racing, and it is the Indianapolis 500 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But 2006 is a crazy one to me, mostly for the action, because since birth I have been a big Team Penske fan. Penske is who my Uncle Bird worked for, building motors for Rusty Wallace. He built for other people's too, but Penske was kind of who was building for when I became of age. So I've always just been a Penske guy. And it was the year that Sam Hornish Jr. made a pass, not just last lap, last straightaway. My man drafted up on a 19-year-old Marco Andretti on the front stretch coming out of turn 4 and slingshots by him at the start-finish line. Not only getting Penske the win, but just the action itself. But I look back at the historical context of it, and you look, I said it in that last name, Andretti. Michael Andretti, Marco's dad, the son of Mario. Michael is an open wheel racer he had accomplished everything but an Indianapolis 500. He kept trying, and he just could not win it. And Michael was actually in this race. He came out of retirement. He was leading late, and I remember his son Marco, 19 years old, in his first Indy 500, I remember the restart when Marco blew past his dad. And I was just like, oh man, Marco Andretti, and he's got that famous last name, and he's in the lead. He's not driving for Penske, but that would have been cool if he could have just held on and kind of broke a little bit of a family curse. But man, Sam Hornish, American racer, making the move, getting the win for Penske. And I mean, if I could have been sitting on the straightaway and seen Sam pull out and make that pass, it's probably like you said, it would have been something where in the car ride home all the way back to North Carolina, I'd have been like, I can't believe I saw that.
Can't believe what we just saw. Yeah.
As much drafting as you see in IndyCar, to be able to pull it off like that, to me, I was blown away watching on TV. I wish I could have seen it in person.
Yes.
But man, that was just, so it has some historical context, but to me, it was just the action and the moment and just the raw ability by Hornish, and that just blew me away. So 2006 Indianapolis 500 lands on my list for those reasons.
I will stick with the open wheel fame, and I will go with the 2013 Indy 500. Some of what I factored into this was the reason I wanted to be there is because my driver won the race. I didn't want to go too biased on that, but I wanted to keep it kind of open. But in IndyCar, I am a Tony Kanaan fan. He's great with the fans. He's just a very approachable guy, and he just seems genuine. And he's had some good rides, but for most of his career, he's been kind of in the lesser equipment. But 2013 Indy 500, that race set so many records just across the board, really, at that time. You had 68 lead changes.
Wow.
So that's something that, as a race fan, I want to see a lot of battles for the lead. I don't want to see one guy out there just stink up the show. You had 14 different leaders of those 68 lead changes. At the time, it had the fastest. It was the fastest race. It had the fastest average speed of 187.4. You had 26 cars ran all 200 laps, so you didn't have a lot of wrecks or people falling out for mechanical failures and whatnot. It had the fewest caution laps ran at only 21. There was a 133 lap green flag run.
That's a long time to wait to go to the bathroom.
Exactly. But it's that constant action. And of course, being a Chevrolet fan, you had the top 4 was all Chevys, and that broke Honda's streak because Honda had won 9 in a row leading into that, and just kind of had a lock on the event, really IndyCar racing as a whole at that time. So Chevy kind of breaking through there, but Tony Kanaan, they had to restart. There were 3 to go. He breaks out. I think it wasn't Hornish.
Is that the one with Takuma Sato wrecked going into turn one?
No,
that's a different one.
That's a different one because
Okay.
I did look at that one, because he was the rookie then and blew the tire going in. I can't remember who won that one. That one was that a Castroneves one, maybe?
It might have been a Helio one.
Yeah, it might have been.
You can just throw that name out there.
He's one. Yeah, it's a good possibility. But anyway, I remember the restart with 3 to go. Kanaan gets a great jump, and IndyCar, especially at that track, my goodness, the way the draft works, if you're getting the jump, you have to get gone quick. And he was able to do that and hold the pace and won by a comfortable margin, if you want to say that, a little less than a second there. But again, just him getting out of the car, just that raw emotion, tears, drinking the milk. 200,000 people chanting Tony for him. I know we got to see that when Stewart won there one time, I think in the Brickyard race, but everybody cheering for him because even this isn't a guy that you may not necessarily pull for, but you don't pull against. You don't root against this guy because he is just such a great just atmosphere about him at all times. He doesn't have any rivals per se or anything like that. So that was really cool, and got to watch it on TV. It was like, man, that'd been awesome to be in the crowd.
I will say, I think part of what also plays into those that I don't think either of us said, but we just imply it, is the historical significance of that track itself, Absolutely. Of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, how long it's been just a bastion of American open wheel racing and how it brings in internationals too, and there is no other venue like it in asphalt racing. I love Daytona to death, but Indianapolis to me is the most historically significant paved track in America. And
it's one of the, if I'm not mistaken, probably the only premier motorsport event to where you have people not make the show.
People get bumped.
Yeah. You have your qualifying day, the carb day, and all that stuff. There's several years. There's some pretty big names that don't even make the show. NASCAR used to have that problem. When they were starting 43, and you'd have 50 guys or so show up, and they had the 2 rounds of qualifying and all that kind of stuff. And even at Daytona, you'd have some guys just trying to make the show. But that number has definitely dwindled over the years. But Indy, you'll have double-digit guys not making the show at all.
Yeah. So now for my third one, I'm going dirt, and I'm going open wheel on this one. But actually, I have to amend that. There is a fendered quality category in this one. The 1991 Four Crown Nationals at Eldora. Eldora Speedway. They call it the world's most famous dirt track in Rossburg, Ohio. Tony Stewart owns it now, but even before then, it was a significant track. Hosts the World 100, the King's Royal, the Dream 100. Go down the list. The only truck race on the dirt. 1991's Four Crown Nationals I found significant for the winners. The Four Crown Nationals in itself is probably right up there with World Finals for me as far as just a unique event. It is a show, and you see different disciplines, and you see guys cross over different disciplines. And for the 91 version of this, the USAC Sprint cars and the USAC Silver Crown cars were racing, both won by Jack Hewitt, who is actually still the all-time wins leader in Silver Crown with 23 wins. Jack Hewitt also, I love John Force to death, but if you YouTube Jack Hewitt is pissed, make sure your kids are not in the room because he does he uses colorful language.
Yes.
But I show that clip to people that don't even like racing, and they get a kick at how passionate Jack was. And if you bring Jack Hewitt up at a dirt track in the Midwest or someone who is from the Midwest, that name holds a lot of significance. Jack Hewitt is an incredibly talented driver. Good at interviews too, but he won the sprints and the Silver Crown portion of the Four Crown Nationals. The USAC midget race was won by a kid who had moved to Indiana from California, who would go on to be a 4-time NASCAR Cup Series champion. Jeff Gordon won the USAC midget portion, and just what he would go on to do, because after this is when he really fully transitions on into NASCAR and he leaves the dirt stuff behind. So this was kind of the last little bit of hurrah for him on dirt. And then the late model portion of the Four Crown Nationals won by Mr. Smooth, Billy Moyer, up over 800 dirt late model wins in his career. So those 3 names being the winners of 4 races, Jack Hewitt winning 2 of them, Jeff Gordon, and then Billy Moyer, you talk about incredible crossover, more so for Gordon and Hewitt, because he's always been a late model guy pretty much. But I mean, there was other 4 Crowns I looked at where like Jack Hewitt, like he either swept them or he came close. He would win 3 races. I know there was the one I sent you a YouTube clip of where Steve Kinzer, I think, won 2 or 3 of them, and he didn't even get to qualify his cars or whatever. He had to show up the day of. So just for how unique that event is, I thought, man, that would have been cool to be able to look back and be like, man, I saw Jeff Gordon win a race, Billy Moyer and Jack Hewitt win 2 races all on the same day.
The 4 Crown Nationals is just an amazing event, and it's as you said, with the uniqueness behind it. I mean, first of all, I mean the pits are just overloaded with cars and haulers and stuff. I mean, they're using the back lot to park. Everybody wants to make that show. And a unique thing about it is throughout the years, the classes have kind of changed. Yeah, because you had at a stint, you had UMP mods running with them. Here recently, you've had the World Outlaws running with them. They actually did the night before the Crown race with them. So the Silver Crowns and the midgets, that's always been the mainstay. But then you've had the few kind of late models have been a part of it, not been a part of it, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, it's just a who's who of open wheel stars or guys who are trying to make a name. And if you can win at Eldora, I mean, you can win anywhere.
Yeah, you can win anywhere.
And that's pretty cool. So I will stick with that frame, and I will go with the 1998 4 Crown Nationals at Eldora. And that is the one that Jack Hewitt swept. Swept all 4 classes. Previous to that time, only a driver had won 2 of the 4. Hewitt was the first one to win all 4. You've had a couple guys get 3 of the 4, but no one has, and they've swept the USAC sanctioned part of it, but no driver has won all 4. So in 1998, you were running the USAC non-wings, the midgets, the Silver Crowns, and then the UMP mods were a part of it. Like I say, he swept all 4 classes. Pretty interesting. Going into that event, he did not have a single USAC win, and left there with 3. Of the 125 laps total amongst for the features amongst all 4 classes, he led 99 of them. The Silver Crown race, he led all 50 laps and lapped all the way up to 4th place. When he swept all 4, but the driver, I don't know why it escaped my mind, but the one that had won 3 of the USAC was Kyle Larson when he was 19 years old, and that was in 2011. He won the 3 USACs. But just a quick breakdown in the midget, Jack Hewitt started 11th. He was at the lead by lap 17. In the sprint car, started 10th. He was in the lead by lap 6. In the mods, he started 4th and had led 8 of the 25 laps. And on one of those, I was watching the old highlight video. He had a bad restart. That was at the end. I'm sorry. Before that, he had a restart. He restarted 4th, took the lead on the backstretch, goofed it up in turns 3 and 4, and came to the start-finish line at 3rd. So he went from 4th to the lead to 3rd all in one lap. Pretty crazy. And then in the Silver Crown, he started on the outside pole and led all 50 laps. And the other unique thing about that is, of all of the divisions, the only car that was his was the Silver Crown. He was driving other people's cars throughout the whole deal.
That is crazy. And just, you know what? Another thing where it speaks to the venue, where Eldora Speedway, Earl Baltus, and the amount of prep and the amount of effort and how it would show, where Eldora is one of those dirt tracks where the top groove is a pretty darn fast place around, but you could run the bottom, you could run the middle. And in these kind of cars especially, like, a lot of the late model races we watch, a lot of times it ends up being, who can make the top work. Whereas, if we watch a World Outlaw race or a midget race there, a lot of times it's who can cut the middle, which is the toughest part. And multiple groove racetrack. But I think for Hewitt, that one, I mean, he probably didn't get to really enjoy, because probably as he's in victory lane, take a couple of pictures, give a quick interview, he's got to go hop in the car because they're rolling next feature.
Oh, yeah, you're jumping out of one car and running right to the next. And to attest to what you were talking about with the lines there, back then at Eldora, especially with the open wheel stuff, the closer you were to the outside wall, the faster you ran. Throughout the years, especially since Tony's taken it over, with the differences that they've done with the surface and how they work it, I mean, it's any given. You don't know what the track's going to give you. It could slick from top to bottom, still be racy. It could be a foot tall cushion that you pound and whatnot. But Jack Hewitt, in that time, they called it the Hewitt line, and because he could run closer to the wall on that outside wall on the berm than anyone. And I remember on one of the funny interviews about Hewitt, he came in after practice and was just stinking it up, and time wise, and he's like, I don't know, something with the car or what. And the crew chief asked him, he said, well, how close to the wall were you running? And he said, I feel like I'm about a half foot off the wall. He said, well, drive a foot closer. And he thought he was closer than he was, but he said drive a foot closer, and sure enough, man, he goes out there, and it's amazing, especially with the open wheel cars, all the thousands of races it feels like I've watched, or laps at least I've watched at Eldora, how close these guys get to that fence without lifting.
And also, just to kind of, I'm getting hung up on it because it's so significant. You look at those open wheel cars and you might think, oh, they almost sort of look the same. They probably drive pretty close to the same. I'm going to tell you something. That Silver Crown car, I've talked to a couple drivers. They're like, that thing is such a hog. It is heavier. It is bigger. The tires are bigger, but it is heavier. That thing does not drive like a sprint car, a midget that he would be running in the other USAC classes. So just because it's open wheel doesn't mean, oh, it was the same. He could go out there and just repeat what he just did in the previous races that day.
Well, the massive amount of power range that he experienced that night, you're going from a 4-cylinder midget, to a 410. The downforce on these cars, having the wing, not having the wing, like you said, the weight difference of it. I would assume across at least the open wheel portions of it, the power to weight ratio is pretty close. But again, that's not going to transfer when you go from 300 horsepower to 800, 900 horsepower. So the true talent to be able in one night to be able to adapt to all four classes and to be dominant, that's impressive. That definitely would have been an awesome sight to see.
So now I go to the year 2000 for the fourth one on my list. The Channel Lock Challenge at Bristol Motor Speedway for what was then called the Pennzoil World of Outlaws. They've changed names a couple of times with sponsors and stuff, but in 2000 it was the Pennzoil World of Outlaws Sprint Cars. The Channel Lock Challenge was a race. It ended up being 2 dates being put on at Bristol Motor Speedway. The World of Outlaws Sprint Cars. I know the late models ran there later on, but to bring the World of Outlaws to Bristol, and this was honestly at a time, this was a kind of a big transition time for the series itself, if you look at just the history of the World of Outlaws, but to come to Bristol and the amount of dirt that they had to put on Bristol Motor Speedway and just how fast Bristol already is paved, throw dirt on it and throw some 410 winged outlaws out there. I mean, it was incredible. Sammy Swindell recorded a 13.86 second lap in a World of Outlaw sprint car at Bristol. The race itself, I mean, there was 3 lap leaders: Donnie Schatz, Steve Kinzer, Sammy Swindell. That right there, you just say those 3 names.
Royalty.
I mean, that's royalty.
That's sprint car royalty.
So those 3 guys lead the race. Sammy Swindell gets the win, but also the significance of this was at least for the sprint cars, they only ran at 2000 and 2001, and I think maybe management at Bristol decided that it was not worth the amount of money that they had to put in to bring, because it was not just a couple of trucks of dirt. It was a lot of freaking dirt. And you had to bring it in, because if you didn't bring in that much, these World of Outlaw sprint cars tear up some dirt. They're so high horsepower. They're going so fast. They're already rooster tailing dirt in the air. If you don't bring in that much, it makes the surface gets rough. You get people falling out, and it really hurts the quality of the race. But just for how fast they were going, how cool it was to see sprint cars at Bristol, for the fact that it only happened twice, I put the Channel Lock Challenge at Bristol on my list, just because that would have been cool. Because it's probably something we won't ever see again. I wish you would, but it probably won't happen again. But to me, that was just historically significant and just showed, I think, a little glimpse into just how popular sprint car racing and especially World Outlaw sprint car racing would become in this country, because now it's just, I mean, with Dirt Vision and these NASCAR guys that openly admit and go race with them and stuff like that, you see, and the fact that every year we go to World Finals, it's selling out every year. It's just it's great to see how big it has become, and that there was an event that I was just like, yep. That there was just a glimpse into how popular this thing's getting.
That event was just an amazing. It just started out as a theory, like could we pull this off? Could we make this happen? And then just the right minds and money really got behind it, and as big, like you said, just they call that a half mile, man. With that banking and stuff, it's just such a massive coliseum. I remember when they were testing the sprint cars there, when they first got the dirt on there, and you had a couple drivers that were passing out, getting knocked out, going into corners because of the amount of G-forces off of that banking. They're not lifting anyway, but going through there, they're pulling so many Gs, they were getting lightheaded in the cars and stuff. So they were talking about having to put restrictor plates on them or something, to try to slow them down. They did some work with Goodyear was doing the tires then for sprint cars, and they did some work with the tires and stuff to kind of, keep the speeds down a little bit and have a little bit of fall off with the rubber. I still have that race on VHS recorded when they started it, and that is one of the main reasons I still held on to a VHS player, because I'll throw it in from time to time to watch it. It's just amazing, just the speed these guys are carried around through there, and I really think rarely do you see guys, like these tracks or just events, like they'll try something like this and then they won't even consider revisiting. Like, we did that, check it off the box and move on to something bigger and better. But I really think with the state of dirt racing as a whole right now, that they could pull it off and we know it'd be successful, but be profitable if they did like a combo weekend, sprint cars and late models together, even big block mods if you wanted to bring them down. That'd be a good track for them with their speeds and stuff that they carry. But just a great location right there in Tennessee. You're in dirt late model country right there. So having the late models with sprint cars there in one weekend, I think would be great. And I'm still holding out. I'd love to see it come to pass. Let's see. Well, I guess I will stick. You said that was year 2000, so I will stick with the year 2000, but different discipline here. I'm going NASCAR, and I'm going the Winston 500 at Talladega. This was, anyone that knows me, I was a huge Dale Earnhardt fan growing up, and this was his final race win, the 76th win, and everyone knows historic for the fact coming from 18th to 1st in the last 5 laps. I'm sure every red-blooded redneck has the Dale Earnhardt DVD thing that they were pumping out after his death, and that's one of the races on there where they're following him, there throughout the end. That race, kind of unique for Talladega. Only had 4 cautions. There wasn't the famed big one. The biggest wreck only involved 4 cars. Again, much like the Indy 500 race I was talking about earlier, you had 104 green flag laps straight. So, that's I do the cautions are nice when you want the break. You like say go to the concessions, get the bathroom stuff. But when it's caution after caution, you're like, my goodness, this thing's never gonna get done. Especially at a NASCAR race, it is nice to have a good green flag run and kind of see how the cars, who's got the long run car versus short run, that kind of stuff. That race, you had Front Row Joe sitting on the pole. Bill Elliott actually led the most laps at 40 there. At that time, I'm not sure if this still holds up, but at that time it was the quickest race they ever ran at Talladega at 3 hours and 1 minute. Like I said, it was Earnhardt's last win. And another cool little feature for me is Dave Marcus, kind of like a Dick Trickle, man, just that old school grassroots hardcore dude that just never had good equipment in the Cup stuff, well, in his latter years, obviously. Started 9th, and he led lap number 2 in that race, man.
That is awesome.
So that would have been cool to see him run it. I vividly remember watching this race on TV because that was just the Sunday thing, get home from church and fire it on and watch the Black 3 all afternoon. But another reason I would love to have been at that race is I went to Talladega a couple years ago, and unfortunately I probably saw one of the more boring races there. Just no action. There was some pack racing, but most of it was single file stuff. The last about 5 to 10 laps you had a little bit of action, but honestly, I literally fell asleep in the middle of the race. It just wasn't much going on. And as much as that's just one of those hallowed ground race tracks and all the history and stories there. As much as I had built it up in my mind, I was really let down just with the action. The trip itself was fun, but just the lack of action in the race. And who knows if I'll ever get a chance to go back, but that was kind of disappointing. The truck race that weekend was pretty good, but the cup race just wasn't hitting on much. So I would have loved to have seen a good race there to have a good memory to attach with it. But yeah, did get to see Earnhardt run quite a few times while he was still around. I think outside of going to the Winston, I don't think I was ever had a race that he won. Maybe a Busch race at Rockingham, maybe, but all the Cup stuff, I never got to see him win a race. So it'd been really cool to have been there to see him, A, to win, but B, also not knowing at that time, being his last win.
You know what? That's one of those races. I remember I pulled it up on YouTube. They had it clipped kind of those last few laps where Earnhardt makes his charge. And I showed it to my wife, she's a racing fan. I think it's safe to say most of it comes from just trying to have a shared interest in something that I've always just loved. And I remember showing her, and I'm just like, I felt I was terribly giving it away. I was just like, look at this. All right, he's going to go to the outside. All right, here he comes. And she was just like, how's he doing that? And it was just his raw talent on display. Because you could say what you want about the restrictor plate racing or the pack racing and whatnot. No one could charge through a field like Dale Earnhardt on those kind of tracks. And you have to attribute that to people used to say, oh, he could see the air. I don't think Dale could see the air. No one can see air. But he knew how to manipulate the air, and he knew how to race in it. And he knew it in a way that other people didn't. His son had some success with it. But, I mean, there was only one Dale. And obviously, we didn't know at the time that would be his last race or his last win. He would die the next year in Daytona. But that was also at a time, I remember before the 98 Daytona 500, where he got that win. I think he'd gone 2 years without winning. He'd gotten hurt. He even questioned himself in some of those documentaries about, is it time for me to get out? Mm-hmm. 98 500, he kind of gets reinvigorated. And I remember that 2000 year, Bobby Labonte won the championship, mm-hmm. but I think Dale finished second, mm-hmm. and he really was going after it. He was trying to get that 8th championship, and even though he didn't win the 2000 championship, I think that race showed that even as he was progressing in age, he could still get the job done. And it also, I think, forever endeared that last name to Alabama. Because when you go down to Alabama, that is Earnhardt country. I think they might be as, if not more endearing of Earnhardt fanhood than the Carolinas are. They love Dale Sr., Dale Jr., and they don't really have that now. But I mean, it's really cool to see that all the way over in Alabama, they love a guy who grew up in Kannapolis.
And Dale Earnhardt at Talladega and Daytona, these restrictor plate tracks, he was one of the few guys that you would see run up through the middle. Most of the time, somebody gets booted out of the line, they get stuck in that middle, they're just free falling back, and you would see Earnhardt, and you can watch it, like you said on YouTube, he's purposely pulling into the middle because he's not going to go anywhere in these outer lanes, and a couple guys, he'll get some help here and there. He was one of the few guys back then that was using the side draft, and everybody does it now. These kids are so smart now coming into the restrictor plate stuff with all the iRacing and whatnot, but he's just learning and trying and practicing things back then. And like you said, Talladega is just synonymous with Earnhardt. Even when I went, just 2 years ago, there's still people wearing, Earnhardt stuff. You got the Earnhardt flags, senior and junior. And that was also, yes, a majority of the people there were Earnhardt fans, but watching that and watching it on the DVD and stuff, you see people with Gordon shirts on cheering for him. You see people with Tony Stewart and Bobby Labonte shirts, because you're witnessing something. Love them or hate them, you're witnessing something amazing right there. And that was a time, in 2000, Gordon had kind of cooled off a little bit. He was still good. He just that tear. He
lost Evernham. Evernham had left him.
And he went on that tear, that 96 through 98 tear, so he kind of cooled off, and now you got Joe Gibbs racing, being very prominent. Bobby Labonte's leading the points for a majority of the second half of that year. So it was nice to see Earnhardt still like, there's a slight change in the guard going on, but you still have to deal with me kind of thing, especially at those kind of tracks. And that was only his second win of the year that year. And like I said, wound up being his last one of his career, but would have been very awesome just to witness that.
Now, down to my last one, and I said I didn't rank these, and I didn't, but this one will always be my number one. I don't rank the rest of them, but this one is my number one because it has too many accolades or things to it. The 1998, nope, got to go further back. 1988 Daytona 500, the Great American Race. From everybody, I'll give everybody else's what other people would consider great about it. It was a father-son 1-2 finish. Bobby Allison, who kind of like Dale Earnhardt in the previous scenario we just laid out. He was older. A lot of people say he's past his prime. He pretty much was past his prime. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was, if it wasn't Bobby's last win, it was darn near close because he gets hurt later in 88, and Dick Trickle has to fill in for him. He about got killed at Pocono. But anyway, back to the 500. So father-son 1-2 finish. Bobby Allison wins it with Davey Allison taken way too soon. Finishes second, so you got that from the outside. It's also the last Daytona 500 for not only Bobby Allison, but also Benny Parsons and Cale Yarborough, three significant names in the history of NASCAR racing. Cale Yarborough, incredible win streak that he went on. Benny Parsons, who contributed a ton as a driver, but also probably my favorite analyst of all time. I loved listening to a race where Benny Parsons Buddy Baker was another one that I grew up and I loved the sound of his voice and the way he analyzed. Also for the fact, the problem that NASCAR doesn't have now, but they had back then, 69 cars tried to make this race. 69. A lot of daggum cars. But for me, the personal thing that gets me is with Bobby Allison winning it. At the time, he was driving the Stavola Brothers Buick. And my uncle, Bert Schaffner, was the man who built the engine that powered Bobby Allison's Buick to get that win. And for my uncle, who I could do a whole episode on him, I wish I could have him here to have his voice on it to tell it himself. He's in a much better place. But he always listed that on his little hero cards and stuff as his greatest accomplishment, was seeing his motor win a Daytona 500. I always remember it because it's the year I was born, so I'll never be able to forget it. And for him, he had done so much in drag racing and other stuff, and then he'd come over to NASCAR and he'd bounced around. He'd been with Earnhardt when he was at Osterlund Racing. He'd been for a few different teams. After this, he would go on to Penske and a few other things before he would retire. But it was his greatest accomplishment, and he's really the guy that I think infused any love of racing in my dad's side of the family. My grandpa sponsored a dirt car. My dad and my uncles have had some interest in racing, just as fanhood. None of us ever drove, but I mean, it all comes from my Uncle Bird. All the Rusty Wallace stuff that my dad and my grandpa still have is stuff that he got because he was working for Penske. That's why I was a Rusty Wallace fan, why I'm a Penske fan. It was one of those things I wish I had asked him about it in person. Yeah. I didn't think to. We would talk racing. He would talk a lot about my race announcing. I wish I'd have asked him more about what it was like, because Bobby Allison was, he's NASCAR Hall of Famer for a reason. And to get to work with him, I wish this is stuff I'll have to ask him on the other side.
That's right.
But that one to me, the 88 Daytona 500 will always be one I wish I could have seen in person. I wish I could have seen my uncle's face and the joy on his face and seeing all his hard work celebrated in that moment.
The father-son stuff is so great, and it means a lot to me. Just my relationship with my dad and all that. And I agree. I mean, just what could have been with Davey there, but that time frame, personally, on my level, I love that body style car. Those when they were in the late '80s and running, I call them the square body looks, but because you had your Buicks, Oldsmobile I believe was still in, Chevrolet running the Monte Carlo and all. Just that look, that just looks like a stock car to me.
It does not look like a race car.
It doesn't look like a race. It looks like legit a car you could buy from the showroom, throw some decals on it, put some bad looking wheels and tires on it, and go race. Compared to what we have.
Now they look like they're running bullets.
Exactly. It's all fabricated bodies and whatnot. But I mean, those are probably still steel body cars back then, man. But that is a stock car to me. When I think stock car racing, that image of that mid to late '80s square body style, man, I loved it. My final race, I'm going dirt late models. And this is a race I have watched so many times I've lost count on DVD, but I'm doing the 2014 World 100 at Eldora Speedway, and as anyone who knows me, my favorite driver is Scott Bloomquist, and this was Scott Bloomquist and Eldora are synonymous with each other when it comes to controversy.
Yeah, I say both good and bad.
Mostly bad. It seems to be.
Is he the one that called it Heldora?
Yeah, well, he's called it several times. Things we can't say on this podcast, but yes. Controversy and Scott Bloomquist and Eldora, and it's almost like a WWF storyline sometimes with all the craziness that goes on. This World 100 is one of my favorites to watch of his because you got to see how good he is behind the wheel of a race car. He's arguably, he's one of the best when it comes to innovation with a late model. As far as developing his own chassis, the things that he tries that nobody's even thought of. Half the rule book is written because of stuff that he did that was legal at the time and he kicked everybody's butt with, so they had to make it illegal kind of stuff. But back to this race, he's starts fifth. By lap 19, he's in the lead. All weekend, this was a 3-day show, all weekend he had been running a plexiglass window at his driver net. The driver's side, the window netting, he had a piece of plexiglass right there, safety thing. Well, again, he had been there for 2 nights, been racing for 2 nights, nobody said a word about it. He's leading the race, lap 19, calls a caution, officials pull him down. They have never said who it was, but one of the competitors pointed it out and said that is an aero advantage. I guess it became an aero advantage on Saturday night after he'd already run all weekend. But anyway, so it comes down. And, of course, they're trying to figure out why the heck are you pulling in. And nobody in the crowd knows what's going on at the time. And you see 2 teammates two crewmen reach in and just rip the thing off and go out. And, so everybody's just stunned. Like, what in the world, what's going on? Put them to the tail of the field, which at that time there's 29 cars running. So he goes from leading to 29th. And Scott's just one of those, he always wants to win, and when there's controversy or adversity, he just ratchets it up a little more. So they take off. By lap 35, he's in the top 15. By lap 45, he's in the top 10. And by lap 55, he's in the top 5, and he is coming. And this was majority of this was legit passing on the green flag laps. There was only 4 cautions total in the race, and only 3 of them happened after he had his penalty. That was on lap 30, 53, 61, so spread out a little bit. So he had a lot of green flag racing that he had to work his way up to the front. I remember very vividly on that lap 61 caution, he's around 5th. He's sniffing the top 5 at that point. Or no, he's already in the top 5. And he's coming down the front stretch, and he doesn't show a lot of emotion. He's just very stoic, no matter how good or bad things are going. And he comes down the front stretch with his fist pumping out of the car, and the whole crowd, he's another Earnhardt style, you either love him or hate him, but you're going to make a noise. And the whole crowd's just cheering because they're witnessing just history as it's being made. Throw the green on lap 61. He takes the lead on lap 72 from Dale McDowell, who had been leading that whole race, and this was when McDowell was still running the Warrior car for Austin Dillon, or Team Dillon, Austin and Mike there. So he takes the lead on lap 72. There's no more cautions at the end of the race, but at the end of coming to the checker flag, he had over a 9-second lead that he won this race by. And he says very candidly in his interview at the end of it that they penalized him because they knew he was going to stink up the show. And he says it, and I believe it. If they would not have penalized him, he would have lapped the whole field. He would have.
I remember him saying that.
He said, I would have lapped the whole field, and that was another. So many great quotes came out of that, but another great quote was, "You saw the fastest race car in the world tonight," and that's been on T-shirts and bumper stickers and stuff like that. But just amazing because that is his track. That is the one track that still, of everything that he's won, everything he's accomplished, there's nothing left for him to accomplish. He has nothing to prove. But Eldora that brings the best out of him, and he still, of all the races he's won there, he still wants to prove himself there time and time again. So he just, like I say, he just steps it up a little bit, and to see him just battle back through the adversity, because most of your guys, typical guys, you're leading the race, they penalize you on lap 19, you're pulling it in when there's 29 cars left. You're not going to take a chance, or you're going to throw a hissy fit. Why are you just now penalizing me over this stuff? But it shifted him in, and he had that kill shot look and put some moves on him and dominated that race.
I guarantee he sold a lot of T-shirts.
Oh, yes.
From that race. But just like you said, incredibly polarizing driver. If you say Scott Bloomquist's name, or if he's at a race that, like, you go to like Cherokee when Lucas Oil runs there and he's there, or any other show he's at, it's pretty much a half and half. But it's kind of like Earnhardt used to say, I don't care if they're cheering or booing as long as they're making noise. Yep. And for Scott also, I mean, if you've been there in the stands watching, especially you as a Bloomquist fan, you got to be half confused and half pissed.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're just like, all right, you pulled my guy down. All right, go give him a spot back. Nope, he's going to the tail. And that's a stacked field. That is not a run-of-the-mill show. That is the best drivers. Yeah. They're sending 50, 60 guys home or whatever it was that have the talent to be in that race but aren't in that race. So incredible field, incredible facility. But Scott said it, I think, in one of his Dave Despain interviews where he's like, I'm not a race junkie. I don't get off on racing. He's like, I like riding around and winning races. But he also said, I like when it's big money, a big stage, big lights. That's what gets his motor going. Because like you said, he doesn't have to accomplish anything else. But those kind of guys, they're kind of built like a hunting dog. And what I mean by that is they are built for a specific purpose. And if they are in their specific purpose, which for him is on a big stage with the best talent, that's where he thrives. And I mean, who'd have thought? I don't think you put that penalty on anybody else in that field, I don't think they get there. It's only Scott.
Yeah, and the fact that he wins by half a track, proves that as well. And he has said no few times in interviews that he doesn't like he doesn't get, like you said, he doesn't get the satisfaction from the racing. His biggest thing, what challenges him, is the innovation side of things. He said, I would rather test all day long versus having to go, race somewhere, halfway across the country. And also, like, he's one of those, you hear it said so many times, when the lights are the brightest is when he, shines the best. You see that in, different sports and whatnot. That's his challenge, man. And that's what fuels him and drives him. And I watched that race on pay-per-view, and
did you jump off the couch?
Oh, I was just as confused as the announcers were. I think Essex was calling that race, and he didn't know what was going on until they finally ready to do it in. And yeah, I was pissed. I was like, and because it is Eldora, and it almost seems like they purposely try to find something to screw Scott out of a good starting spot or a win or whatever the case may be. I'm like, are you kidding? Of all things,
yeah.
You guys are reaching deep in the bag to try to hurt my guy here.
It's not like he rolled across the scales light,
yeah,
or he dumped somebody, or that one. What race was it at Eldora where was it him where he'd gotten in a tussle with somebody? And they came back out and basically wrecked into him in turn 4 on a caution lap. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
I don't remember who it was. I don't remember what year it was, but he was involved in it, and he had to go to the pits.
Yeah.
They got damage on his car.
Yeah, he was leading the race. Absolutely had the fastest car. And I'm wanting to say Bob Pierce, but I'm thinking it was Jack Boggs. I cannot remember who was in front of him. And whoever it was running the top, and then Bloomquist gets to him, and going into one, he goes in middle, and that's where Bloomquist had been running. Bloomquist is in there. He's already got the momentum, tags him, and I'm not saying this as a biased fan, but he tags him, and of course he thinks it's on purpose and comes around, hits him head on and whatnot, and pretty much ruins his day.
Yeah. Just incredible. So those are just a few. We probably could go through a lot more now that we kind of open our brains up and think, but those are 5 really good ones on both sides.
Yeah.
But I think it would also be helpful to say, maybe just to keep it short, one event that you look back and you're like, I'm glad I was at that. And another one, well, we could probably go 5, 10 events per se, but what's kind of one that comes to your mind as one that has some significance now when you look back on it, or just meant a lot to you that you're glad that you were at? Or if you'd like, I can kind of go first if you need some time to think.
No, because the more I think, the more I'm going to go through the massive catalog of all the races there. The very first one that comes to my mind was I'll probably go the Dirt Million. The inaugural Dirt Million. That one stands out to me just for so many reasons. It's the first big dirt race at a predominant paved track, much like the Bristol thing. They come in, they put dirt on it, they're taking a big swing, putting a bunch of money on the line, and that they had run like 2 kind of small shows to kind of test it out, but this is you're taking a big swing right here. So my dad and I and some friends of ours, another father-son couple, we take off, drive up there. It's a 2-day show, I want to say, and just the facility's amazing, just first class everything. We got the pit passes, walking through and all that stuff. The first night of racing, they're qualifying, doing heat races and whatnot. Again, some Bloomquist controversy. He sets quick time, and then he's 10 pounds light at the scales. They do the 2 rounds of the heat races there, and the track was pretty rough in 3 and 4, and so it was fun to watch how guys had to attack that corner, because the preferred line was where your ruts were. So guys would set up, some of them call it the off-road package, to where they can drive through that, and some guys were still trying to hit it, and there was just crazy wrecks, and some, your leader would hit a rut and get past stuff. So there was a lot of passing, and it was just, it was different. It had a lot of character to it. But that Saturday night, that main event was just amazing. I mean, just all the stuff that happens. You had, I can't remember how many lead changes, and every time somebody take the lead, like, well, it's his to lose now, and then 4 or 5 laps later, here comes someone else. Jonathan Davenport's just tearing up through the field, and looks like he's going to be the car to beat, and he takes out one of the Ute tires and ruins his night. Ricky Weiss, as a rookie, comes up through there. He sniffs the lead for a little bit. Jimmy Owens is up there. Earl Pearson pits 4 times, winds up, or 6 times, excuse me, winds up winning the race. The last about 20 laps with Bobby Pearson, Earl Pearson just back and forth, and Bobby Pearson just ripping the cushion, and Pearson just slowly on the bottom. And I mean, the whole place, I don't care what T-shirt you were wearing, the whole place were on their feet for the last 20 laps, fist pumping. You had the flagman get about taken out by a rock that got thrown up, and he's up there with a busted face. You got the window falling down, and the crowd scattered. It was just crazy, everything that came on, but the race itself was just phenomenal. I had guys at home watching on pay-per-view. They're texting me, calling me in the middle of the race, like, holy crap, did you see what happened there and all that stuff? And that was one on the way back. Walking to the truck, everybody, I cannot believe what I just saw. Cannot believe what I just saw. And driving back from Mansfield, Ohio to North Carolina, I cannot believe what I just saw. I mean, it was just something that will go down in history. They'll probably never run that event again. They ran it twice, and it's scrapped now. So very happy that I got to be A, at one of them, and then B, the more exciting of the 2.
That's pretty good. I'll go asphalt, and I go back to 2011, the Martinsville Late Model Race. God knows what it was called. I don't know if it was. They had to change the name because the federal government came in and said that Bailey's couldn't sponsor it because of tobacco, whatever the issue was. So I don't even remember. It might have been Valley Star Credit Union 300. It was the Martinsville Late Model Race. And you had an incredible battle down to the end between Matt McCall, who is actually now the crew chief in the Cup Series for Kurt Busch for the number 1 car for Ganassi. He still had his late model that he would run from time to time. And Lee Pulliam, who ends up being I think it was a 4-time national champion, pretty young guy in his early 30s. And it was for me, it was pretty cool also because it was the only time I got to be a part of a call at Martinsville. That race, NASCARHometracks.com did a audio-only broadcast through Speed 51, and I got to be a part of that along with Tony Stevens, Duke Kenfield, and we had 3 man in the booth. Derek Pernisiglia was down on pit road, so we would kind of hand off between the 3 of us up there up top, and that was a ton of fun for me. I felt like I really got to learn a lot. Just from being with those guys who all had more experience than me, plus calling a race at Martinsville.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that meant a lot. But you get down to the end, there's a couple restarts, and Martinsville's so flat, the inside's where you got to be. Lee Pulliam was not in the lead, so he did not get to be on the inside. He had to keep working the outside. I've never seen someone drive the pudding out of a race car, out of a late model at Martinsville, like Lee Pulliam on the outside. He is trying and trying and trying. And McCall's a great driver. And he's holding his own. Well, apparently somewhere earlier, I guess Lee Pulliam took exception to something Matt McCall had done. Or maybe this was just last lap hijinks. We get down to the last lap. And they go off. They take the white flag. They go off into turns 1 and 2. They are side by side, McCall and Pulliam. McCall's on the inside. They come out of 2. I had never seen someone do this. McCall's got the lead on the inside. He knows to hold his line. He knows not to go back up and try to clear himself off of Pulliam. He holds his line. What does Pulliam do? Pulliam lets out and gets in line behind McCall. So at the time, I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
Why did he do that? A little bit later, I find out why he did it. They go into turn 3. Lee makes contact with McCall's back bumper, lifts them wheels up off the ground, which even for someone of Matt McCall's skill, the car ain't going to turn with 2 wheels off the ground. McCall gets jacked sideways. He somehow saved it. He gets wrecked in the end because as he comes back down the track off of turn 4, some other people run into him because it's just a dash to the finish. So McCall goes sliding up. Well, he had help getting slid up. But Pulliam makes the bump and run, goes to the inside, passes him, gets the win. While he's doing his burnouts on the front stretch, getting beer thrown at him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these people are throwing full Bud Lights at Lee Pulliam. He gets out of the car to celebrate, makes it worse. Now more beer's getting thrown at him. Other drinks are getting thrown at him. And it was kind of an Earnhardt move. It was a bump and run. Mm-hmm. Some people were upset. Lee obviously wasn't. He going to get the cash a check. It was incredible. And we were just sitting in the booth like, I can't believe I just saw that happen. And I remember McCall comes onto the front stretch, and he's obviously got a big crowd of people following him. All the media people are following him too. So it looks like a mob is coming. And Matt McCall, we actually called this wrong. He comes over and he does the action of shaking Lee Pulliam's hand. We took it at the face value. Oh, he came over to congratulate him. Hold tight. If you look at the Race 22, got it on YouTube, and you have the audio to go with it, Matt McCall's basically like smart alecking him. Like, no, it's okay. It's all right. You know, what's going to go around comes around. That's right. And he says in his post-race interview, he said something like, you know, I got bigger things coming down the road. He knew, I think, he was going on to working Cup as a crew chief. And Lee Pulliam just didn't have the money behind him to get a shot to come up. But it was incredible. Third place finisher Brandon Butler was actually advocating in one of his interviews like, well, you know, Lee dumped him, so he ought to get disqualified. I finished in front of Matt. I ought to get the win. I mean, it was just crazy, all these different things that came together, and it's Martinsville pre-lights, so they had to hurry up and get this thing done before it got dark. And to me, I was just like, wow, man, like that was one I rode back home, and I was just like, man, wow, what a finish. And I'm not a fan of either guy per se. I like them both. Didn't buy either of their T-shirts, but it was just a crazy finish. And like you said, the thing I think the barometer for this is, would you have gone back to your car and ridden all the way home thinking like, wow, I got to witness that.
Yeah. That at Martinsville, man, that's half the fun with the late model race up there is just to see when they used to do the qualifiers or heat races, whatever you want to call them, was when they're taking top six, you don't want to be that sixth place man going into turn 3. And it's expected then, but in the feature, for me personally, I don't expect it as much because most of the time your guys who are battling out for the lead, they're the cream of the crop. They understand, the money that's going into this, all the preparation going into it, and I'm not going to take that chance. I don't want to ruin this guy, and I don't want somebody to ruin it for me. So it's kind of in the back of your mind, man, this dude might dump him, but when it actually happens, because I was there for that race as well, but when it actually happens, you're like, holy crap, he really did, and that was pretty wild when Martinsville again just putting on a great show.
But hey, definitely something that would not have come about if we didn't pay attention to other disciplines. Neither you and I are both advocates of not locking into one discipline as your only source of racing. One thing I hope you hear from both of our lists is that we watch different kinds of motorsports because different kinds of racing offer different things. And as a race fan, I know you probably agree with this, you don't get the same thing from watching a Formula One race that you do from watching a World of Outlaw late model race. And that's perfectly fine. But you can still get something from both of them. And maybe you like one more than the other. That's perfectly fine. I'm at the point now, I'd rather watch a sprint car race than anything else, but I'll still get something out of watching like a UMP modified race, if I'm there in person or something.
Yeah, you're going to have your favorites or your ones that you draw a little more to, and there's certain forms of racing that just naturally provide more action, on track action. Like a sprint car race, you got 24 sprint cars on a quarter-mile bull ring. You're going to get more action on that than a Formula One race on a 3.5-mile road course, obviously. And it's okay to have your favorites and stuff, but I don't like when people get so locked in on the one discipline and it's the only thing they know, think, talk, breathe, and they just shut out everything else, or that other stuff sucks. Well, first of all, saying something sucks isn't an opinion or a take. That's that's not a take. Excuse me. That's just an opinion, which is wrong. If you are a NASCAR guy and you don't understand Formula One, if you think that's just open wheel guys and it's so easy to drive and the downforce and all that stuff, and you just have that mindset, then you're not going to appreciate it when you turn it on and watch it, when you might see 2 passes for the lead, maybe. But if you understand what's going on in that car, how hard he's attacking that track for 60, 70 laps straight, the strategy that goes in with the tires and stuff, look past all of the surface stuff and you look into what's really going on, then man, it will open up a whole new world to you. The sprint car guys, man, you got 900 horsepower in a car that weighs 1,400 pounds, and you are trusting that guy that's throwing the slide job to clear you before you come, because if you don't, you touch wheels at 110, 120 miles an hour, you probably could die.
Yeah.
And NASCAR, man, you got 43 dudes, within a couple feet of each other screaming down the backstretch tally. They all provide their own just uniqueness to that said sport, but don't just get locked in on one. I appreciate and probably like dirt more than anything, but I will sit down and watch 2 hours of a Formula One race, or I'll watch a little bit of a NASCAR race, or whatever the case may be. But just keep an open mind about it and find out the intricacies of behind each sport, and you'll really appreciate what's going on.
So you know what? Not only go out there and watch different disciplines, but you know what? Find some of your own. Look back now on your racing fanhood and find some ones that you're glad you watched and pass it on. Pass it on to your buddies, pass it on to your kids, pass it on to your family members. You might, I wouldn't like World Outlaw Sprint Car Racing if it wasn't for you, brother. I wouldn't have been exposed to it without, going to World Finals and stuff like that. So, share this stuff, man. That's what it needs in any level of racing now more than ever. Just share it, man, because there's a lot of competing interests for your money or your entertainment. But I think racing always needs it probably more than anybody else does.
And it take time, just a little bit of time, to appreciate what you're seeing across those sports too, because like we said earlier, at the time, yeah, this is cool, or yeah, this is big, but you don't realize how cool or how big or how significant or how historic what's going on. So when you're watching the 41 races and you're sick and tired of seeing Lewis Hamilton win every race, take time to appreciate what this guy's doing. because he's setting records that may never be broken or be a while before it's broken. When you're watching, whatever the sport may be, whoever's dominating it or a big event, just appreciate what's going on. And like you said, just share it. Like, man, you can't believe what this guy's doing. And let's help grow this thing and make it bigger and better and more popular.
I think your Labrador is telling us we need to cut the recorder off. So at the behest of Brock the Labrador, I think we'll go ahead and sign off on that one. But thank you, buddy, as always.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it, my man.
Thank you for listening to yet another edition of the Half Price Concessions Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the Half Price Concessions Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Himalaya, Stitcher, Castro, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and Castbox. Also, be sure to find us on Facebook and give us a like. Just type in the Half Priced Concessions Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at HPC Podcast, and also find us online at www.anchor.fm/HPC Podcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope you have a blessed day. This episode of the Half Price Concessions Podcast is brought to you in part by our friends at Performance Center Racing Warehouse. Located in Statesville, North Carolina, Performance Center Racing Warehouse provides racers with just about everything you need to go asphalt late model racing, including being the home of the PRW chassis. From a full-blown fabrication shop to services that can help you get your race car re-clipped if you've been in the wall one too many times, or you just need to get your racing program straightened out. Give Roger Johnson and the folks at Performance Center Racing Warehouse the chance to earn your racing business by calling them today at 704-838-1400 and visit them online at performancecenter.com. That's PERFORMANCENTER.com.